Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Yoga for Women podcast with your guide, Kate Payne. This week, I am speaking about these two beautiful energies of the masculine and the feminine and how they apply to a woman's life cycle and also in the context of yoga. When I consider the masculine and the feminine from these two places of a woman's life cycle and yoga, I really love to consider them as dedication and devotion. And what does that ultimately look like? How does that transpire into the day-to-day living? When we look at women and we look at a woman's life cycle, what we have done as a Western culture really, really well is teach women dedication. We have taught women how to be dedicated to work, dedicated to family, dedicated to lifestyle, dedicated to all of these pieces that make up the greater whole. But one thing that we haven't supported women in doing is one, being dedicated to their bodies, but in a way that also brings in this beautiful feminine aspect of devotion. And so I want to talk about this a little bit more to give you some more context and so that you have a little bit more of an understanding of what this all means. So I want to start with the story. I want to share with you a story of a woman who grows up being quite active. By the time she gets into her early 20s, she's introduced to yoga. And during this path of yoga, she really falls in love with the physical practice, as most people enter the yogic practice through the physical body, through asana classes. This is how she too comes to discover yoga. And she really falls in love with that aspect of practice. And over time, she's able to dedicate herself to practicing yoga on the mat in a studio setting 3, 4, 5, up to 7 times a week. As she kind of gets into her late 20s, mid 20s, she meets someone that she can see herself spending the rest of her life with, and she's starting to consider having, children sometime in the near future. And so she starts to consider what that might look like. And so, having been on the contraceptive pill for close to the last decade, she knows that, it's time probably to come off the pill and allow her own body to find its natural rhythm so that she can eventually conceive a child. So she goes off of the pill, and what she starts to notice is this deeper connection with her body through her cycle as it begins to re-regulate itself. And what she starts to notice through this practice of observing her cycle is that her yoga practice starts to change and evolve. Her yoga practice starts to shift based on her cycle. She starts to notice how she's perhaps a little more tired in the week or the days leading up to her bleed. And then during her bleed, she wants something quite different from her practice. And yet she's going along to a yoga studio where the class is a one-size-fits-all approach to practice. It has a blend of both men and women in practice, and it's not giving her quite what she's looking for, even though she loves the yoga practice and she has absolutely loved the asana and the movement and aspects of the breath and meditation when they've been brought in. So what this does is it starts to move her in a slightly different direction. It allows her practice to evolve and move a little bit more towards a devotional practice and away from this dedicated, I go to yoga on these days because it fits in with my schedule, and not having access to my cycle, then, I'm not able to really notice too much shift or change with the physical body. So she starts to say these kinds of things to herself. Then when it comes, of course, time to want to conceive in her late 20s, She again notices that things in her cycle start to shift and change. She needs to become more aware of when she's ovulating. She needs to become more aware of what phase of her cycle she's in. And again, she needs to be able to modify and tailor her practice. So again, her practice starts to move a little bit more towards this devotion to her body, this devotion to the feminine, this devotion to connection with something greater than oneself, which really is the essence of conscious conception, conscious fertility. She has relative ease in falling pregnant, and she moves through pregnancy and into the birth portal. And again, her practice shifts and changes based on her body and how she's feeling. She then starts to move into the birth portal and postpartum, and again, her practice shifts again based on her own individual needs and what she's tuning into and what she's feeling like she needs in her body. And then after she's had her first child, you know, she's wanting to move her body slightly differently now. It's a completely new form. It's evolved. It's carried and birthed a child. It's now in motherhood phase. It's now in the season of mother. And so her practice again shifts and changes, and she decides that she wants a little bit more activity from her practice. So she returns somewhat to more of a vinyasa, stronger flow practice to give her this opportunity to move the energy through her body and to allow her to start to feel that strength in her body again, the way that she did pre-pregnancy. So her practice in some ways returns to a more masculine way of being, a more masculine approach to practice, where it's dedication, it's time showing up on the mat, it's moving through the movements. But there's also still this peppering in and these elements of the divine feminine as well. She then decides to have another child, and so the cycle begins again. She starts to tune into her cycle. She starts to modify and change her practice. Her practice again moves a little bit more towards the feminine. It becomes a little bit more of this devotional space to be able to again conceive, carry, birth, and mother a second child. And so she continues through the same similar cycle as what she did with her first child. And then again, post second child, her practice shifts again as she starts to feel into what her body needs. And then I'm sure as she, you know, moves through into menopause, the same thing will start to occur, because this woman that I speak of is me. I started my yoga practice when I was 21. I started a physical asana practice, and it has evolved over time. And what started as a very dedicated masculine practice has evolved into this beautiful blend of both the masculine and the feminine, where there are aspects of dedication and discipline required to show up for a regular practice, to show up for a regular sadhana, and to be with my body, to be in relationship with my body, to be in relationship with my life, to have an understanding and a level of awareness that gifts me choice, conscious choice at every step and every stage, as well as this aspect of devotion that is this devotion to the feminine, this devotion to my feminine form and how my body shifts and changes with my monthly cycle, and how it shifts and changes with the season and the phase that I find myself in. And as I move in towards menopause over the next 10 years, it's also an opportunity to dial up my self-awareness, to dial up my connection and my relationship with my body. And my sense from what I have experienced in my own life, as well as witnessed with the women that I train in teacher trainings and also that are clients, is that our Western culture has failed to teach us devotion. It has failed to teach us how to be in relationship with our bodies. It has failed to teach us how to be in relationship with our lives as women and to really honor the season and the cycle that we find ourselves in, and to have the right balance of a dedication, a masculine essence, as well as a devotional feminine essence. And when we can interweave those two together, we really have a beautiful opportunity to tap into and remember and live from a place of innate wholeness. So, my invitation for you, as always, at the end of every podcast episode, I have an invitation, an opportunity for self reflection, for self contemplation. And today it is this: where in your life do you have elements of dedication that you can draw from? Even if you don't currently have a regular yoga practice, where are there elements of your life where you have dedication? The essence of dedication is already embodied. And then where in your life do you have elements of devotion that you can also draw from? And how can you start to observe how these two interweave with one another throughout your day to day? And how can you use this level of awareness to start to become more in relationship with your body and more in relationship with your life?